Welcome to the crash course in Germany's federal government. If going into this video you have absolutely no prior knowledge on Germany's government, don't worry. We were in the exact same position when we first started researching it. We will be covering the basics, and to make it even easier for you, we will be comparing Germany's government to the United States throughout the video. That way you can have something to base the information you're learning off of. We apologize if this seems a little extra. We know some people are visual learners, so we figured this could be an interesting alternative to the usual PowerPoint. We will try to keep this as short and sweet as possible, but there's a lot of information to cover, so let's get started. Oh, I also wanted to apologize in advance for my art skills. Definitely not an art major. Hopefully I won't offend anyone or hurt your eyes. Anyways, in order to discuss the structure and politics of their government, first we must ask ourselves, what kind of government does Germany have? Obviously, we wouldn't even be discussing it if it weren't some kind of democracy. Now, the structure of Germany's government shares quite a few similarities with the United States. We'll get into what those are in a little bit. The essence of democracy, however, plays a much different role in Germany than it does here in the States. In comparison, we have a much more liberal system than they do. We'll get into why that is later as well. For now, let's focus on the structure. Germany has what we call a federal parliamentary republic. This is a pretty vague definition and doesn't give us much to go on, so let's break it down. Here we have the United States, and over here we have Germany, on the complete opposite side of the world. You'd think the two couldn't be further apart, but we can actually use the same silly model to describe both. Each has three branches of government that work together to share power and control over the country: the executive, the legislative, and the judicial. Let's start with the judiciary branch. So there isn't too much here that differs from our general knowledge of what a court system looks like. They have judges, practice judicial review, and they can declare legislation unconstitutional. Sound familiar? That's because their federal constitutional court has essentially the same job as our Supreme Court. However, unlike most Supreme Courts, the FCC frequently participates in constitutional control and participates much less in matters of appeals than our Supreme Court does. Let's look at some of the more specific differences between the two countries. In the United States, we have 9 federal justices who are nominated by the President and ratified by Congress. In Germany, there are 16 judges in total. They are split up into 2 equal factions, which are called senates. Some people argue that having 9 judges is way too much and nothing will ever be agreed upon. I wonder what they'd say about having 16. The U.S. justices are elected for life, wherein the judges in the FCC are elected for a 12-year term and must retire at the ripe old age of 68. Awesome. Let's move on to the legislative branch. Germany has their own version of Congress. Instead, they call it the Federal Convention, which also consists of 2 bodies that meet to create legislation. Remember earlier when we talked about Germany being a federal parliamentary republic? This is that parliamentary part. As you know, Congress consists of a Senate and a House of Representatives. Much like the Senate, the Germans have a Bundesrat. Sorry, whenever I say that word, I feel like I have to add an accent. Another way to think of it is as a federal council, or think of it as the upper house of parliament. It's important to note that members are not directly elected by the public. German citizens elect state governments. The states then nominate and elect members to transition to the Bundesrat. There are 16 states total in Germany. Each state is given a certain number of nominations, which is dependent on the population of each state. Overall, the Bundesrat has a total of 69 seats. Instead of a House of Representatives, the Germans have a Bundestag. It sounds very similar to the Bundesrat, but don't get them confused. They are very different. Think of it as a federal diet. And no, that doesn't mean Germans can't drink their Dunkin' or have to avoid sweets. Diet is just another term for assembly. You could also look at it as the lower house of parliament. The Bundestag has the only federal officials who are directly elected by the people. Yay, democracy. Members must be at least 18, and there are absolutely no term limits. It's actually really interesting to see how the German citizens vote. Each citizen gets 2 votes. On one side of the ballot, there's a list of candidates. On the other side, there's a list of parties. In total, the Bundestag has 631 seats. Now on to the executive branch. This is probably where the greatest difference between the US and Germany is found. Obviously, our executive branch is controlled by the president. The Germans have a president, but they're not exactly equal. The current federal president of Germany is Mr. Frank-Walter Steinmeier. The president's role is mainly ceremonial, and the position holds very little power. The president is elected for 5-year terms by the Federal Convention and is considered the head of state. But where does that leave the rest of the federal government? Who's in charge? The Chancellor. Sounds like a superhero. The current Chancellor is Angela Merkel, who's held the position for an entire decade. Talk about women in the 21st century. The Chancellor is nominated and elected by the Bundestag. Again, not directly by the people. You decide if that deserves a thumbs up or a thumbs down. The Chancellor holds office for 4 years and also has no term limits. Hopefully this video didn't completely bore you to death and helped you learn something you didn't already know about the German government. Thanks for watching.